Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to our live debate. The topic that we are going to be discussing today is over the issue of web-based delivery, ABA, versus the more customary types of delivery, which would be in-home or in a facility. My name is Jennifer Sizemore, and I am on the pro side for web-based delivery. To make it easier, what I will be referring to that as throughout today's presentation, as well as my colleagues, is TeleABA. Now, as many of you know, tele, the root word obviously being at a distance, is exactly what that means. So when you hear about telehealth or TeleABA, telemedicine, all of that stuff is just offering services to people, help and services to people at a distance, or from a distance, I should say. So we are all very much aware of the rapid increase in diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. Obviously, the diagnosis happens no matter where. It's not a regional thing. So we have people in places, certain areas that are a lot less able to get services through the more customary ways. Like I said, having somebody come into their home or going to a facility to have this as an option. This is where TeleABA comes into play. It is a system which integrates the use of communication technologies to deliver specialized services to individuals and their families at a distance. What you're about to hear in terms of our pros and cons with this has a lot to do with, we're going to talk about ethical codes, the people who are going to be carrying out the services. What TeleABA typically does is focuses more on assisting the parents. So it's more like parent training via web, so that parents are able to do basically what behavioral therapists do in their home, since we can't be present. Like I said, it's a way for TeleABA is a way to include evidence-based interventions, make it more accessible when it's not accessible or feasible in other areas. So this is also something that a potentially costly involvement of professionals is decreased. So the cost is slightly more reasonable, but then again, you're not getting the professionals in your home. So what I want to say is, I'm not sure if our viewers are aware of this, but I know for myself, before studying about TeleABA, it shouldn't be a surprise to me, but obviously services have been needed for a long time. We've known about ASD for a long time. We've had individuals diagnosed with autism for a long time. How did these families in areas, which I'm referring to rural areas, because those are the ones where typically you're going to be more in isolation, right? You're going to be less likely to be close to a facility or within a driving range for somebody to come to your home. So what I'm saying is, before we had the introduction of TeleABA, how would these people receive services to help themselves, their children, and families? Well, what they would do, I learned, is families still had the option of contacting an ABA service, and between their health insurance as well as the company and the family's income would come up with a plan of how to fund this. But what would happen is a professional would go out to the house, usually fly out there, stay with the family for anywhere from a couple days to a couple weeks, and they would help the family in that way while they were there. And then they also, when they flew back home after their time was up, would communicate via email, or there was a family that talked about sending videotapes back and forth with the therapist to get her feedback on what was going on in the home. So, if you compare the two, obviously, TeleABA, if you're able to click on your computer, get on the internet, and talk to somebody face to face, just as we're doing right now, it's a lot more effective, and it's way quicker than that system would be. So I know I'm going to wrap it up soon, because I know my colleagues want to talk as well about this. But before I do, like I said, it makes it more feasible, it's more accessible, it's evidence-based intervention, it's in real time, it's available at any time. And, you know, there's going to be hiccups, I'm sure, as there always is with technology, but there's also hiccups in our day-to-day life, which can get in the way of services being provided to families in a timely manner or when they're scheduled to. So before I close, I'd like to share with you all, I'm going to share with you a chart right here. It's from the official Journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. So let me share this with you, and it talks about the cost. So let me share my screen here. 1 second, please. Get to a better. Let's see if the other one's better. Give me 1 second. I apologize for the delay. Let's try this one instead. All right, so what you're looking at is the average weekly functional analysis and functional communication treatment costs per child. As you can see on the y-axis, there are dollar amounts, okay, so we're talking costs, and then on the x-axis down at the bottom, you're going to see what type of therapy it's referring to. So the first one obviously is in-home therapy, this one here. Our second one is clinical telehealth, and the third one is home telehealth. Now you're seeing the 3 shades of colors, right? Dark black, a lighter gray, and an extremely light gray. What are those referring to? Well, if we scroll down to the bottom here, we can see that the dark black is the staff costs, the darker gray is facility costs, and the light gray is family costs. I won't spend too much time on this chart, but it was a really simple way of it breaking it down. And this is from 2016. So this is not an old chart. You know, this is still pretty recent. It's within less than 2 years old. And what it's showing you is that there is a decrease in the amount of cost for TeleABA facility, and an even more decrease if you are accessing therapy via telehealth in the home. So, and again, the reference is at the bottom, and the article that it was retrieved from was Lindgren, and it's telehealth and autism, treating challenging behavior at a lower cost. Anyway, so that I thought was very helpful, and hopefully gives you a better idea of what that looks like. Okay. Everyone can see me now, correct? Just checking. Okay, so that's going to be what I have to say for now. I will again be with you all towards the end, and I will summarize any points that my opponents make in regards to risks of this type of therapy. But without further ado, I would like to introduce you to my colleague Laurel, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about her view of telehealth. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. Thank you, Jen, for that introduction to TeleABA. So being able to provide services virtually sounds like a fantastic idea, but in reality, there are many things that need to be considered before this could be a viable option for ABA services. Currently, there is limited evidence to support TeleABA as an appropriate delivery method, and more experimental results are needed to validate the effectiveness of TeleABA services before this method could be used regularly. There are also issues pertaining to parent training and resources. So parents may lack the time needed to participate and acquire adequate training prior to implementing ABA services and methods. Parents may also have a hard time scheduling due to other commitments the family may have. Another resource that could pose problems for the families is money. The research shows that cost for agencies and clinicians is greatly reduced, but it could be increased for families if they don't already have all of the needed materials, such as computers, internet access, cameras, microphones, printers, all of the equipment that goes with printers, the special software that an agency might be using. Technology issues also pose another concern. There's the possibility of internet interruption during high volume times. Also, the setup is not conducive to a hectic household. So if a kiddo is moving from room to room or getting up, getting down on the floor, there's all this setup and reset up and takedown and everything that goes with that, which can interfere with the delivery of services. Current research is another limitation right now. Current research is limited to a younger population of 1 to 7 years of age generally. More research is still needed to see what age range is going to best be treated using TeleABA services. And another issue with research is that many of the studies so far have used multiple methods at once. So this includes in-person training, handouts, booklets that have been made, online training. There are multiple components. So right now we cannot conclusively say that TeleABA alone has been responsible for any positive outcomes. And most studies also have not really used a comparison group or a before and after kind of thing. So it's more of just on a case-by-case basis, they've said that this has worked, but there's nothing to really compare it to. Finally, I would also like to mention that there are some possible BACB compliance codes that may not be followed fully if we're providing TeleABA services. So codes such as 1.02 boundaries of competence, how much more training and time and money is going to be needed in order to properly train staff to provide these kinds of services? How much more difficult will it be to comply with code 2.03 consultation when clinicians already aren't actually seeing their clients face-to-face and all of these possible disruptions could happen? And how are we going to follow code 2.05, which is getting written consent? If we're not seeing them, getting this written consent is going to be so much harder if we don't have all of the needed equipment like scanners and all this. There's going to be a delay in services if you have to mail something, all of that kind of stuff. How are we going to ensure client privacy and confidentiality? Code 2.06. All of their information has to go over the internet, and we're going to have to do all this extra encryption to make sure that all of their information stays private and confidential. And just because this method might be better for a clinician financially and for an agency financially, is this going to be best for the family? And also, are the interventions going to be up to par? So that relates to 2.09, treatment, intervention, and efficacy. How are we supposed to properly implement interventions without seeing everything happening clearly? And there's always the issues with technology and know-how and possible internet interruptions, which could cause an interruption in quality of services, which is code 2.15. Lastly, code 3.01, behavior analytic assessment, requires clinicians to perform assessments prior to developing treatment recommendations, which is really going to be hard to do if we're not seeing these kiddos in person and the families in person, and we're just relying on word of mouth from what the parents are telling us and the data that they're collecting that we can't be certain is accurate. So next, I would like to introduce Rachel, who will be discussing the pros of TeleABA in more detail.
Here we go. Thanks, Laurel. Again, I'm Rachel. So though there may be some concern surrounding this relatively new technical resource, research says that this is a practical, effective, and a cost-effective method for delivering behavior analytics services. So I'm going to go over some of the research now and some research that is in support of TeleABA methods. So research conducted by Lindgren and Associates compared telehealth and in-person ABA therapy outcomes in both the clinical and in-home settings as compared to TeleABA. And they found that all methods were successful in decreasing target behaviors for reduction. These authors, as well as Vismara, Young, and Rogers, support the use of TeleABA as a more cost-effective means for delivering ABA services to families. This makes this option more feasible and ABA services more accessible for people with varying incomes and in nearly any location. Available research doesn't only cover behavior reduction too, so that's not the only target of the research that's been done. Studies have found that telehealth methods are effective in implementing a variety of behavior analytic interventions. Boisver and colleagues support telehealth as an effective means of delivering a multitude of interventions based on their systematic review of 8 different studies. A similar review by Parsons and Associates supported TeleABA as a reliable means for parent training. as was mentioned before, and this included measures of treatment fidelity and knowledge of behavior analytic measures, and that is as it applied to communication and social skills growth. This was further supported by Seuss and colleagues, who concluded that distance therapy showed no difference from in-person therapy for fidelity and treatment outcomes when these were measured and conducted by parents. TeleABA has been used in experimental measures of ABA interventions as well, where there's direct manipulation. For example, Michalacek used TeleABA to conduct parent trainings on antecedent and consequent interventions, as well as in functional communication training. So Jen mentioned that in her visual earlier. They deemed this as a preliminarily effective means when done by parent measures. The research done using TeleABA is not in any way exclusive of the measurement of the same parameters that are used during in-person research in homes and in clinics. So BACB code 3.01 was mentioned by Laurel, and this requires that certified individuals provide assessments to be conducted before providing interventions and treatment suggestions. Wacker and colleagues were able to find a 90% agreement in IOA data collected from the use of TeleABA to conduct functional analyses. Such fundamental behavior analytic services like functional analyses, preference assessment, and intervention monitoring have been supported with this means of delivering as well, and that was supported by Higgins and colleagues. This research suggests that this compliance code can be met during and using TeleABA. Finally, we can't ignore the importance of the caretakers, stakeholders, and clients that are involved. Interventions are not valuable unless they're deemed socially significant by the people who are directly involved, so the caretakers and the stakeholders. Laurel mentioned many concerns with the feasibility and the ability of parents to utilize this type of intervention delivery, but research supports that parents and caretakers both find telehealth as an effective and satisfactory means of delivering and receiving ABA services. And it has also, as I previously mentioned, been found to be a more cost-effective option too. Parent satisfaction surveys conducted by Reichel and Oberleitner reported high levels of satisfaction, and they also found that TeleABA measures were able to be implemented within the BACB compliance code for confidentiality 2.06, which is also a concern that Laurel had raised. So though there are many valid points against using and that kind of question TeleABA therapy as an effective means, the data and the research that are available at this time actually support this as an effective, a reliable, and a feasible method. So next, I would like to introduce Ashley, who is going to talk a little bit more.
Thanks, Rachel. Although Jen and Rachel make great points about the positive aspects of TeleABA, there arguably can be a lot of faults found with this type of deliverance as well. They stress the significance and benefits of having a communication system that can be accessed at any time by anyone, making it more easy and accessible to families as opposed to in-home therapy. But is this really true? Is the internet really accessible by everyone? We must consider that there are thousands of people who are without internet access. This might include lower income families who may not be able to afford the internet, those who simply do not use the internet, and those who live in rural areas who may not be able to access the internet due to their geographical location. So now I'm going to attempt to show you a graph. This is from the United States Census Bureau from 2015, showing that there are still a lot of areas in the United States that are without high-speed internet. So this point that I'm making can be further reinforced by this graph showing that there are still a lot of people who are not able to access the internet, and therefore, how can they access TeleABA? Without internet, they can't access TeleABA. So even those who are with internet also may experience difficulties in receiving TeleABA services. As opposed to in-home therapy sessions that can occur in almost any conditions and can be rescheduled within a reasonable time frame, TeleABA services may be ceased in cases of bad weather, power outages, and any complications related to the actual computer. So all of these different circumstances could render services inaccessible for hours, days, and even weeks at a time. Jen and Rachel both discussed the importance of how TeleABA is feasible and allows easy access for parents. But just because it is easy, is it really worthwhile? Are we really meeting the needs of our clients if we are unable to see them in person? How are we supposed to conduct proper assessments and observations if we are not present? This relates to the BACB Ethics Code 3.01 Behavior Analytic Assessment. Although we may be able to view our clients over the internet, we are unable to visibly see our clients in their natural environments with our own eyes. So at the end of the day, secondhand information from a parent for assessments is less reliable than firsthand observations by the actual professional. So in the same breath, we have to raise the question, can the internet really replace the intimacy of human interactions? As Laurel pointed out, although there is research that has shown that costs for agencies and professionals delivering services has decreased, there runs a risk of an increased cost for families. For TeleABA services, parents are responsible for making all of their own materials, which include activities, toys, programming. They're also required to have a working computer, microphone, internet access, and a camera if one is not installed on their computer. So Vismara, Young, and Rogers 2012 stated that if parents cannot access the intervention regularly or find the intervention too difficult to implement throughout daily life, parents will likely not use the techniques when on their own, let alone achieve high fidelity of implementation. So if parents realize that there is an increased cost to them in order to deliver services, will they really want to participate, or will they look for something cheaper? And although Jen makes an excellent argument for the parent and their increase in skill level, one can argue that although they are gaining knowledge in ABA services through TeleABA, do they really have enough training and education to actually deliver the services? Therapeutic staff support, behavioral specialists, BCBAs, and other professionals in the field require hundreds of hours of coursework, supervision, education, and skill training in order to deliver these services. During in-home therapy, skills are able to be transferred to the parents to use outside of session if they choose, but do not require the parents to actually deliver the services to the child during session on a regular basis. So although we are able to view the parents over the internet and deliver feedback, is it really beneficial to have the sole provider of services be someone who has had significantly less training and education than those who are required to in order to deliver the services? So this brings us back to the original point of accessibility. If the internet is not working, how are the parents supposed to receive feedback and support when delivering these services that arguably they're not qualified to do in the first place without the same training, education, and knowledge that professionals are required to have? So now I will transfer it over to Crystal.
Hello, everyone. My name is Crystal. Laurel and Ashley have made some very interesting points in their case against telehealth and TeleABA services. However, I must disagree that accessibility issues hinder the ability for TeleABA to be an effective as a form of treatment. In fact, TeleABA is a great tool to bridge the accessibility gap for learners who live in rural areas and may have no other means to obtain ABA services otherwise. It has been reported that on average, 70% of people living in rural America do indeed have access to broadband internet service. True, as Ashley stated as well, there is a small percentage of people in rural America that do not have internet, but this is a very small percentage, as you could see in the visual that Ashley presented as well. They are clearly the minority. Additionally, the overall average of individuals in the United States with internet access is roughly 75%. And it should be noted that the gap between those in the US that have internet and those who do not is just roughly 5%. And this is a small gap and ensures that the great majority of people in the United States could very well obtain TeleABA services if they required it and wanted it. In order to make such services even more accessible, in fact, internet providers such as Comcast, Time Warner, and Cox Communications have recently partnered with telehealth organizations. And through these partnerships, new video conferencing services have been introduced and new telehealth companies have been developed. And this, in fact, improves accessibility. Also, additionally, it is true that rural areas do often have less access to high-speed internet service than urban areas typically do. However, it's also true that these rural areas have less access to ABA services in general. So this leads us to ask ourselves, what is really worse, receiving TeleABA services with slower internet than usual, or not receiving any kind of services at all? Considering the fact that typically TeleABA and telehealth services are not administered purely through video conferencing, but also through secured email and through phone calls, I can confidently say that TeleABA would be a wonderful option for receiving treatment if in-person ABA services just were not an option. Laurel and Ashley also touched upon the issue of affordability of TeleABA services as a concern. It is true that families may need to purchase some materials to implement ABA interventions at home. This is, though, a rather small expense when it's considered that in rural communities, the average residence is typically a minimum of 20 plus miles away from the nearest medical center. Traveling to and from these centers to receive services like ABA services is not only not time efficient at all, but also very costly on gas. Many individuals living in rural America don't have access to public transportation as well. And therefore, the only form of transportation to a medical center would have to be a personally owned vehicle. And the cost of a vehicle in combination with maintenance of the vehicle and insurance for the vehicle are all quite expensive. Also, if a family is not able to purchase additional materials for their home to implement these ABA interventions, it is possible for a behavior plan to be kind of formed around the materials that they do have accessibility for. And after all, that's the beauty of effective ABA, that it's individualized. Speaking of individualization, there are several advantages to TeleABA that involve just how personalized it can be to specific learners' needs. Not only do learners have the comfort of receiving therapy in the home setting, but services can also be provided on a flexible and convenient schedule. And of course, this is possible because services do not take place in person, but rather through technological means. Although it can be argued that parents do not have the proper training to implement ABA interventions, it is also extremely important to note that parents must be thoroughly coached on how to implement interventions for their children. And that is regardless of whether the services are being received in person or through means of TeleABA. This remains the same. If parents are not able to implement interventions themselves, then the skills that the learners acquire are not likely to generalize. And of course, we all know that generalization is the goal of the therapy that we provide. TeleABA actually offers an opportunity for parents to be trained more thoroughly on the implementation of behavioral interventions. And the close collaboration between parents and analysts combined with the very high family involvement in TeleABA is so beneficial. Ultimately, learners receiving services with TeleABA may be much more accepting of interventions when first beginning therapy because they feel secure in their own home and they're working closely with familiar people. Lastly, I'd like to address the question, is TeleABA considered an ethical form of treatment? Due to the fact that TeleABA is not as common as ABA services that are administered in person, some question its ethicality. I attribute this to a fear of the unconventional. Code 2.09 in the BACB Professional and Ethical Compliance Code states that clients have a right to effective treatment based on research literature and that is adapted to individual client needs. TeleABA is an effective form of treatment and an extremely beneficial method for those who may have difficulty obtaining services otherwise. And after all, no matter where our clients may live, they have the right to obtain effective treatment that meets their unique needs. Thank you.
Thank you also, everybody, for presenting your well-known facts and opinions about telehealth versus in-home therapy in the realm of ABA. So I want to leave you with one thing. First of all, I don't believe that it's definitely not my goal, and I don't believe it's the goal of Rachel or Crystal to persuade anybody that we think that TeleABA is better or, you know, a more effective choice than in-home ABA or facility therapy. I just think that I don't want that to be misconstrued by anybody. All we are saying is that it is definitely an option to consider for the population of people that don't have easy access, and it's not feasible for them to receive services any other way. So although my colleagues all bring up good points, I wanted to reiterate that because that is very important. I think it's exciting that we're seeing the growth with technology and what we can do with it and how we can better aid people in that position. We're not saying that, you know, people with income issues or whatever else, even though it is cost effective, whatever, we're not saying that this should replace in-home therapy or therapy received at a facility. So again, yes, you heard there are actually a lot of parallels between TeleABA and in-home ABA, facility ABA, in terms of pros and cons. So, you know, you talk about, I know Ashley had mentioned like weather and outages and things like that. And, you know, yeah, I mean, if there is a natural disaster or something that occurs, we're gonna have to figure out a way around that, right? Because we have seen not so long ago in our own country some of these natural disasters and putting, you know, certain areas out with no internet capabilities whatsoever for a while. But typically, you know, if you're having just a power outage because of a regular storm or something's wrong with the computer, you know, those are things that can be fixed pretty rapidly, and that's just life. I know I personally do in-home therapy, and there are a lot of times where there are families who are contacted by my company saying, so-and-so's car broke down, or this person is sick. And so, you know, even with in-home therapy, it's not free of fault. You know, things are going to happen. Life is going to happen. So I wanted to definitely make that point. The other point that I feel greatly parallels is when we talk about parents. We know that the training of parents is really important. I felt that Rachel did a fantastic job explaining that, and I thought that Ashley did a good job talking about it as well. We know the importance of training the parents or the caretakers the proper way to react to certain behaviors and contrived situations and all this good stuff. What I'm saying is parents are going to get out of it what they put into it. That's the bottom line. Same with parents now. I have a lot of parents who listen and nod their heads when we help them with some instruction as to what we think would work best and what we would like to see them doing at home. But ultimately, when we leave, we know that there are behaviors being reinforced that we did not expect or want to be reinforced by the parents. So they really need to. It's like I said. You can you can talk till you're blue in the face about what you want the parent to do, but they're ultimately going to do what they're going to do. And if they really want to see a change, then hopefully they will listen to the professionals. That's why we're there, to help and to aid. But we are not there to be a constant in the home. And families need to understand that, whether we're providing services in their home, at a facility, or at a distance. We are only there temporarily. And so this generalization and these parents gaining the skills, that's something that they're going to have to do either way. And, you know, I think I can see that there are advantages and disadvantages to both, but I do feel that my colleagues bring up some really great points. And I just wanted to reiterate that the use of technology, telehealth, or TeleABA is really, it's coming rather quickly. We know that the growth in technology is expanding daily, and it's something that's going to happen either way. So we just need to figure out how to work with it and how to best provide the care to people with autism that we can. So we all need to work together on that, but not lose sight of the fact of in-person therapy as well. So I hope that you enjoyed listening to all of us speak. I know that I'm not going to be the closer for this conversation. That's going to be Laurel, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about some closing arguments she has with TeleABA as well. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out on the discussion board. If you just post your questions, one of the 5 of us will definitely get back to you with an answer or comment. So we appreciate you taking the time to watch this. And without further ado, Laurel, the floor is all yours.
Thank you for that little wrap up, Jen. I think no matter what, we need to be able to ensure that we are following our ethics codes and that we are providing the best possible services to our clients. This was actually our second attempt at recording this debate the whole way through. We had to re-record due to a bunch of different issues with the original video, a lot of technical issues. We're all grad students who all frequently use these tools, who have used video conferencing kind of stuff, all these kinds of things. And we had done multiple test runs and thought we had worked out all of the little issues with it, yet we still ran into some pretty substantial technical issues, including internet lag and video and audio cutting out and user error, because there was a bunch of times, even during this time, a couple of times, I forgot to switch the person on screen right away. And our original one had some issues with our displays or our visuals displaying properly. So these types of things are what are the true concerns about doing TeleABA, because these things are unacceptable during a real session. And just because you've done all this practicing and you think you've figured it all out and you've ironed everything out, there's still the possibility of those pretty substantial things happening. And when push comes to shove and problems are happening during session, it's just going to make it worse. And it could cause more stress for the families who are currently getting those services, because they're already stressed out, things aren't working properly, and they're trying to implement these interventions that they aren't fully qualified to be implementing in the first place. So overall, more research definitely needs to be done on the deliverance of ABA using telehealth technology. More cost-risk analyses need to be completed before this could ever be a widely accepted ABA deliverance method. We need to make sure that just because it's more beneficial and cost-effective for clinicians, that it's not putting too much strain on families, and that insurance companies aren't going to just see that it's less money for them to have to pay for clinicians to do these things, but that it's an actual valid method to be used. And so it's not saying that TeleABA will never be beneficial in the future, but for the time being, I'm going to have to stand my ground and go against the use of TeleABA until enough research has been done to deem it worthwhile and effective. Until then, we need to stick with the methods that we know are absolutely effective and start looking into other possible methods that could help us maybe reach these clients who are currently without services. This concludes our debate. Thank you so much for watching.